All right. Well, we're at noon, so I'm sure we'll have some people trickle in both online and in person. But I will start us off because we have a wonderful lecture coming from Subbu Subramanya. And so I'll introduce myself and we'll get started. I'm Jacqueline Sundberg. I'm Outreach Librarian here for the Roar Collections. And thank you for joining us today, whether you're here in person or online. We are joining you from McGill's downtown campus. And for those of you who are here in person, you probably noticed what's happening on lower campus outside. Today is McGill's annual or 22nd annual powwow, celebrating the First Nations cultures, Inuit and Métis cultures here. And so I do encourage you, if you have time after the talk, go out and participate in what's happening on the lower campus, because this place, McGill University, is located on lands that have long served as a place of meeting and exchange of ideas for Indigenous peoples, including the Ganyagahaga Nation and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe Nations. We honor, recognize, and respect those nations as the traditional stewards of the lands and waters on which our brick and mortar building stands today and where we are all meeting today. So it's kind of lovely that that meeting place is happening outside and we're bringing together ideas, paintings, and people from very far away. And with that, I will invite our next speaker, which is Lauren Williams, to give a bit of an introduction on the Blackerwood collection and the birds that, of course, are bringing us all together today. Lauren.
Thanks very much, Jacqueline. Hello, everyone, and welcome. It's wonderful to have you all with us today, both virtually and in person. For those of you who I haven't met yet, I'm Lauren Williams, and I'm the curator and librarian for the Blackerwood Natural History Collection. The Blackerwood Collection is home to quite a number of original artworks and published works on Indian birds, the subject of Dr. Subramanya's talk today. So I thought I would give you a little bit of background about how these works came to be held at McGill. The Blackerwood Collection was established in 1920 through the efforts of Dr. Casey Wood. He was an ophthalmologist who, toward the end of his medical career, became fascinated with the study of bird vision. This interest led him to begin collecting works on ornithology, but his library soon grew to include material on all aspects of zoology. After it was donated to McGill, the collection continued to grow, and it now includes material covering all of the natural sciences from the medieval period right up to the 20th century. In addition to books, the Blackerwood Collection holds incredible manuscripts, field notebooks, journals, and correspondence, and over 10,000 pieces of original artwork. In his efforts to build the collection, Casey Wood left no stone unturned. He employed agents all over the world to seek out and procure rare volumes for him, and he delighted in hunting down ever more rare books and other items to add to the library. After he retired from his medical practice, he took frequent trips to Sri Lanka, often spending more than half the year there. He delighted in exploring the birds of the island and even commissioned a local artist to produce an extensive study in watercolor of the birds in their habitat. He also spent his time documenting the local avifauna and in a series of publications in ornithological journals. This interest led him to begin collecting works relating to birds and the natural history of Sri Lanka and India wherever possible. We have a few highlights from the Blackerwood Collection on display in the exhibition case, which is just outside and to the left of these doors. If you haven't had a chance yet, I highly encourage you to have a look on your way out. You'll be able to see selections from the James Forbes collection of zoological drawings and collages made while he worked for the East India Company in the mid-18th century. The ornithological notebooks and drawings of F.J. Shore, who, despite working as a judge for the East India Company, was openly critical of its rule in India, and who worked with local Indian artists to produce paintings of his bird specimens, as well as an edition of T.C. Jerdon's Birds of India, which includes numerous additional notes, drawings, and paintings of birds added by a later owner of the book, some of which may have been created by Indian artists. And last but certainly not least, we have on display two paintings of birds by Elizabeth Gwillim, a British woman who lived in the Chennai region of India in the early 19th century. Casey Wood discovered a collection of over 100 of her paintings in a London bookseller's shop, and recognized immediately that they were by the hand of no mean draftsman, as he put it, and purchased them for McGill. My colleague Victoria Dickenson will tell you more about Gwillim and about the large-scale research project that has revolved around her work over the past few years. But I wanted to mention that we are indebted to the work of Dr. Subramanya, as he was one of the first specialists in Indian ornithology to examine the collection back in the 1990s and to identify many of the bird species depicted by Gwillim. Crucially, all of these artists and ornithologists relied on Indian artists, guides, bird catchers, and local expertise in order to locate, catch, and depict these species. This work is often uncredited, but researchers like Drs. Subramanya, Dickenson, and Winterbottom are striving to find ways to identify and highlight the work of these local collaborators. I'm incredibly pleased that the material in the Blackerwood collection lends itself so well to this research, and that it has brought together scholars from all over the world to bring these important stories of natural history to light. So if you have any questions about the items on display or about the Blackerwood collection, please feel free to ask me after the event. And now I'll pass things on to Dr. Victoria Dickenson to tell you a bit more about these research projects and to introduce our speaker today. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. Merci. Well, it's my great pleasure today to introduce Dr. Subramanya. Subbu and I have worked together for 5 years, but we met for the first time in person yesterday. So it was just a delight. We've met over Zoom so many times. Subbu was a founding member of the research network for the Gwillim Project, which Lauren has mentioned. This was a social sciences and humanities research council supported project to examine the watercolors of Elizabeth Gwillim and her sister, Mary Simons. They painted these watercolors in around Madras at the beginning of the 19th century, and Subbu is going to tell you much more about them. The Gwillim Project had a research network. It was a research project development, and our network included, by the end of the project, it took 4 years, almost 50 people. My project manager, Anna Winterbottom, is with us today, sitting here, and Subbu, as I said, was a founding member of it. But the project team, the research team, included not just ornithologists, but botanists, ichthyologists, art historians, historians of science, dress and textiles, culinary historians, and others. And that was what made it so exciting. It was an interdisciplinary project that brought people together from India, the UK, the US, and Canada. So, and despite COVID, we all managed to meet virtually. And we, as a result of this project, we held webinars. COVID prevented us from meeting in person, but we held webinars which are available on YouTube and to date have attracted over 30,000 views. So that's very exciting for us. We also produced a website and a book, which I'm pleased to say has arrived. It's McGill Queen's University Press. It will be launched here in the Colgate Room on the 25th of October at noon. And it's lovely to see Vikram in the audience too, one of our authors with the book, Anna, Lauren, and Subbu. And it's great to finally see the results in print of the book. So when we launch on the 25th, the book will be available. Subbu will continue to work with the Blackerwood and with Anna and myself and Vikram as we work on a new project, which has been mentioned, Hidden Hands. And we're looking really at the hidden hands in the development of colonial natural history collections. There are 4 projects, and what's exciting is they're all based on collections held here at the wonderful McGill Rare Books and other collections. One of the collections is on the Durabier albums, a French engineer living in Saint-Domingue, which is now Haiti, in the mid-18th century. We're working with the Société d'Histoire et Géographique de Haiti on this project. We have another project on the Métis homeland, which is looking at the Francis Simpson herbarium sheets at the McGill Herbarium at Macdonald College. And we're looking at that in connection with the Manitoba Museum and a number of Métis artists and art historians. We have another project in the Hidden Hands on the Olas, which are palm leaf manuscripts. We have Dr. Danis de Pereira with us today. Our partner on this project is the National Archives and Library of Sri Lanka. And the Olas also bring into the project the Redpath Museum and the Osler collections, which all have materials from Sri Lanka collected by Casey Wood. So Blackerwood Library, Casey Wood, but the collections extend even further. And finally, the Forbes collection, which Anna Winterbottom is working on with the Bombay Natural History Society. And Subbu is also involved with that project in Hidden Hands. So we'll be launching the project website for Hidden Hands later this year. And we think it's going to be a very exciting project as we look at the people behind many of these collections who are not necessarily on the title pages of books or are remembered in scientific names. Now to Subbu himself. Subbu has been retired from the University of Agricultural Science in Bangalore, but he came to McGill. He has a connection with McGill's Macdonald College, where he was visiting scholar in the 1990s. And that's when he first saw the Gwillim collection here at McGill. And he actually wrote an article about them. And it was through this article that I found Subbu when we started to connect, when we started to look at the establishing the Gwillim project. But Subbu studied himself birds under the legendary, and I do mean this, legendary ornithologist Dr. Salim Ali, who with Dillon Ripley at the time, the secretary of the Smithsonian, did a magisterial Birds of India. And Subbu, of course, is legendary himself. He's a passionate ornithologist, a conservationist, and a naturalist, and as you will hear, an expert on Indian birds and the paintings of Lady Elizabeth Gwillim. Subbu, over to you.
Thank you, Victoria. It's so nice to be back here in McGill after 24 years. And it is also so nice to be here in Montreal. Of course, the campus has not changed, but I don't see so much of the skyline that you used to see in Montreal before. Today, I would like to talk on a certain aspect of Indian bird paintings done in 18th and early 19th century, which has never been examined before. This is the way the birds have been painted and also how the backgrounds have been added to these paintings, where we get to see that these backgrounds that have been added to these bird paintings are not real. They don't really indicate the habitat in which the birds have been found. For this, I'll be examining some of the collections within the within McGill, held at the Blackwood Library. And one of the collections I'll be looking at is the Gwillim collection, which is a set of 121 Indian bird paintings done in Madras, the present-day Chennai in India, by Lady Elizabeth Gwillim, done between 1801 to 1807. And also I'll be looking at the James Forbes collection that Victoria talked about. James Forbes traveled in India as an artist and a writer for the East India Company, and he wrote extensive letters and also made illustrations of natural history, people, and landscapes in India. And he published his observations and illustrations in 4 volumes of Oriental Memoirs, and in which there are quite a few of these illustrations have figured. And I'll also be looking at Frederick John Shore's paintings. No, sorry. Something.
Here. There we go.
Yeah, I'll be looking at Frederick John Shore's paintings of 195 plates. These plates and extensive notes he did with these plates have been made as an appendix to the book written by John Latham, A General History of Birds, which runs to 10 volumes, published between 1821 to 1824. I'll also be looking at a collection of 33 illustrations, bird paintings done by an unknown Anglo-Indian artist. This was done in pre-1900. I'll also be looking at some of the illustrations produced by T.C. Jerdon, who was one of the most celebrated Indian ornithologists. He pioneered in Indian ornithology. T.C. Jerdon was a physician, botanist, and zoologist. He contributed immensely to Indian ornithology by describing many bird species that we have in India today. About me, I'm a birdwatcher ornithologist based in Bangalore. I've been studying birds from the last 45 years, and my areas of research include wetlands and water birds. I do now presently, I work with the State Wildlife Department to designate protected areas. I do a bit of habitat restoration based on an understanding of how birds work and also what works for birds. I've traveled across India. There are a few states I'm still yet to cover. visiting them to look for birds. Thanks to Victoria Dickenson that I came into Gwillim project, because I was here at McDonald campus in 93-94 when I had the first chance to look at some of the, not all the paintings, some of the paintings of Lady Elizabeth Gwillim. And I collected, the library was so good enough to provide me with all the information that I needed to know about Gwillim. And with that information, I went back to India, wrote about her paintings in the newsletter for birdwatchers, through which Victoria tracked me down to and invited me to join Gwillim project. And it's so nice to be part of this project. The kind of amazing scholarship that's been given into this project isn't really astounding. About Lady Elizabeth Gwillim. Gwillim was born in England in 1763, learned watercolor paintings from George Samuel, one of the landscape artists. She married Henry Gwillim in 1784. Sir Gwillim was knighted in 1801, and in the same year he was appointed as Judge of Madras High Court. Elizabeth Sir Gwillim and her sister Mary traveled to Madras in 1801. They resided in Santong, an area in Madras, in a garden house. Both Elizabeth and Mary wrote frequent letters to their mother and sister in England. Between 1801 to 1807, Elizabeth and her sister painted birds, plants, fishes, insects, buildings, and landscapes. Lady Elizabeth Gwillim died in Madras in December 1807. She is buried at the St. Mary's Church in Fort St. George in Madras. And here are some other paintings of Lady Elizabeth Gwillim. And these birds are so beautifully illustrated and accurately depicted that so much so that you can actually identify each and every bird to its species level. And these paintings also come with wonderful backgrounds. And the combination of this bird illustration and the background make these paintings very picturesque. Here are some more. There are totally 121 of them. And some of these, of course, I've seen most of these pictures, the pictures of these paintings in the website as PDF scans. But when I look at, I've been looking at these paintings since Monday. They are really stunning at the way the paintings are being done. These paintings are all watercolors, and those who understand watercolors will understand how difficult it is to bring such a quality of illustration to these paintings, because these watercolors have to be built up layer by layer, working from the palest layer to the darkest. And it looks like Lady Gwillim had a mental plan of how to build up these layers, how to work on these colors to bring out this illustration, because every feather is in its place with every species. And these illustrations are so perfect with respect to physical features, posture, and proportions. And these birds paintings come in all sizes. The largest is that of an Asian woolly-necked stork, which measures about 93 centimeters to 69 centimeters. The smallest is of a plain Prinia, which measures 20 by 25 centimeters. And the widest of them is the Brahmini kite, which measures about 69 centimeters to 78 centimeters. And this graph shows you the scatter plot of different size distribution of these 121 paintings held by McGill Nursery. And also, these paintings come with varied levels of backgrounds. And there are about 56 paintings which come with very detailed backgrounds. And another.
Sorry about the connections. Let's just
It's slipping on. Yeah. About 56 of these paintings come with detailed backgrounds. About 21% of them come with some background. And about 39 of these paintings don't come with any background at all. And of course, here are some of the paintings with very detailed backgrounds. And these backgrounds have been worked out so very well. For example, even some of the plants that occur in these paintings can be readily identified at the species level. They have been so accurate. And here are some examples of paintings which don't come with so much a background, but at least they're an indication of some background components. And these are some of the paintings which come with no background at all. The way Elizabeth Gwillim worked on this painting is that she first painted the bird in full. Later, she added the backgrounds. How do you know about it? Because when you look at each and every painting in this 121 painting, we find that the birds have been painted in full with their feet showing, where the tarsus, toes, and claws have been very well painted. And in some of the illustrations, see there are pencil sketches of the backgrounds, indicating that she added them later. And when you look at the presence and absence of backgrounds in Gwillim paintings, you find that Elizabeth added components to the background that she was familiar with. Most of the habitat information appears to have been collected from trappers or bird suppliers based on where these birds were captured. But on her own, she never visited these locations or studied birds in the wild. For some of the birds that she did not know their whereabouts, the paintings have no background. Or maybe she did not have time to add backgrounds to these paintings as well. And here are some of the paintings with detailed backgrounds. And what I've done is that under these backgrounds come with various components. And I identified about 20 components which occur across these 121 paintings. These components include plants, trees, boulders, water, hills, palmyra palms, temples, river, natives, coconut palms, sea, mast, ship, buildings, animals, coastal areas, boat, and church. And this graph gives you a frequency distribution of how these components have been distributed across these 121 paintings. Based on in the collection, I'm sorry, it slips out on its own. Based on the numbering of the collections in McGill University, it appears Lady Gwillim painted about 200 paintings. McGill has only 121 of them. We don't know the whereabouts of those other 80 paintings. And if ever they are found, if you want to identify whether they really belonged or done by Lady Elizabeth Gwillim, it is very, very easy to do that, because all you have to do is focus on the first 5 histograms in the graph. That determines her style as to how she has worked out these 5 components, that is plants, trees, boulders, water, and hills, into the backgrounds. That determines Lady Elizabeth Gwillim's style. And now let's look at some of the backgrounds to her paintings. So when you look at Lady Gwillim's backgrounds, you see that not all that meets the eye is right. Because the backgrounds that you get to see, they are not real. They don't represent the habitat in which the birds are found. This painting of Asian woolly necked stork, which has been made to stand on a dry parched ground in front of a boulder pile overgrown with a creeper. But in effect, this is a real habitat for the species. This species is a bird of wet areas, shallow under keeps to the shallow water margins, and also flooded grasslands, which is never ever represented or depicted in the painting. And here is another heron. Of course, is the Indian pond heron, which has been. Sorry, it's okay. This is an Indian pond heron, which is made to stand on a dry, parched, boulder-strewn landscape. But in effect, this is a bird of, and it's restricted itself to shallow water areas. And whenever if ever you come to India to watch this is how you get to see the bird. There is another heron, the intermediate egret, which a group of them have been made to stand on a dry, parched area, and a group of them made to look gregarious. But in effect, this is a solitary species which restricts itself to shallow water area for feeding. And this species, I think, Lady Elizabeth Gwillim got it all wrong with this species because this species never occurs in large groups, is not gregarious. She must have mistaken another bird species, the cattle egret, which is gregarious, and she must have depicted the intermediate egret occurring in groups. Another bird species that we have to look at is the brown-headed gull, which is a seabird which has been made to stand in a dry, rocky terrain, which is not the real habitat of the species. And whenever you see brown-headed gulls, you get to see them in such a habitat in the sea and coastal areas and large wetlands, freshwater wetlands, and the shallow water margins of lakes. There's a crested serpent eagle, which is a totally arboreal bird which keeps to well-wooded canopies of trees, dense canopies of trees. And here the bird has been made to sit on a boulder in front of sit on a rock in front of a huge boulder, which is not the way you get to see the species in the wild. And the plant that you see is the ivy gourd, which is a very popular vegetable grown in and around Madras. And it has been walked into the background of this painting. Here is another species, the blue-faced malcoha. It's a very shy and skulking bird. And when we go out for bird watching, it's rather very difficult to see the birds. We usually get to see only the beak or eye or the tail of the bird because it's that shy. And it's been made to look stand out in the open on a branch, which is not the real case with the species in the wild. And here are a pair of Oriental magpie robin. So there's a painting of a pair of magpie robins, which have been made to sit on dry, broken tree trunks amidst a boulder pile surrounded by water. And this species actually found in light wooded areas and gardens with plenty of shade, which is not the case that you see in the painting here. And she has illustrated two yasanas. We call them as jasanas in India. This is a pheasant-tailed jasana, which is a lily trotter, which can balance very well on floating lotus leaves and lily leaves. And it has a cousin, the bronze-winged jasana. Both of them keep to vegetated portions of wetlands. And this can also balance itself on a lotus leaf because of the extra long toes. And here is how Gwillim illustrated them. They've been made to sit on dry, parched areas, indicating that she had no clue on where these birds came from. It is again a heron, the striated heron, which looks totally in shock. Okay, here is another species, the striated heron, which keeps to rocky streams and wooded wetland margins, and this is how we get to see it. But this aspect of the habitat has not been brought out. And well, when we come to James Forbes' collection, it's a different ballgame altogether. James Forbes painted some birds, copied some from others' works, cut and pasted the others' published information, illustrations, mix-matched his birds with insects, plants to create his illustrations. In effect, he fabricated most of his illustrations. Here is an illustration where he says a small white owl of the natural size, drawn and colored from nature on the island of Salsette. Salsette is a greater part of Mumbai in India. And this, as per James Forbes, this should be the collared scarpsole of India, but this bird actually is an illustration of a much larger owl, which is of almost this size, belonging to the dusky eagle owl. Even the leaves have been cut and pasted from somewhere else. And here is another illustration. This is where it gets very interesting. There's a illustration of what he says as cock and hen tailor birds at Bombay. The plant is the fruit-bearing Oriental convolvulus. But the birds are not no tailor bird at all. The common tailor bird that you find in India is what you see in the top left corner. And the nest is again made by bringing together two large leaves and stitching the margins with cobwebs and cotton strands. And the illustration is mainly of a pair of purple rump sunbirds. And when you look at these images closely, this image was created in 1768. Of course, this is the illustration from the Yale University collection. And this is a very hybrid kind of plant, wherein two plant species parts have been brought together to create this illustration. The flowers belong to Ipomea indica, which belongs to the family Convolvulaceae, whereas the fruit and leaves belong to ivy gourd, Coccinea grandis, which belongs to the pumpkin family. But when this illustration gets published in Oriental Memoirs, Volume 1, and it is a different ball game altogether again. He has corrected the mistake for Convolvulus by bringing together the flower and also leaves of Convolvulaceae, but it still retains the fruits of Coccinea grandis. And here is another illustration of a Brahmini kite, which has been poached from George Shaw, Frederick and Elizabeth Nodar's The Naturalist Miscellany. And what he has done is that he has just cut off the branches on which the Brahmini kite perches, as you see in the original illustration. And he has created his own by slightly tilting the image. Because now we come to another set of illustration from an unknown Anglo-Indian artist who used to be in India, and this is done prior to 1900. And here, most of these illustrations have been prepared from preserved specimens, collected specimens, because most of them you see they've been made to perch on tree stumps. And all of them have the same pattern of posture. And it indicates that most of these were made from preserved specimens, not live birds. Because here again, it appears that he got these birds from collectors. Here are two birds which are pelagic species, the species which are found in deep sea. And one is the Wilson's trump petrel, and the other is the riddle tern. Both of them are found way away from the coast. And here it's been, they have been made to look as if they are on the ground, dry ground, which is not the case with these two species, where the habitat that's been illustrated is not the right one. Of course, this is not just true with the paintings of Lady Elizabeth Gwillim or others, but it is true with most of the birds, the paintings that are done during 18th and early 19th century, and even with those that are part of the company paintings. Let's take a look at this illustration by Sheikh Zainuddin, who is one of the finest artists who worked for the Imperi's album. And this is the illustration of Sarah's crane, which is, I find it one of the finest illustrations that you can ever see. But here, Sheikh Zainuddin never went to the field at all. The bird was presented in front of him, which he sat and has painted, whereas the true habitat of the Sarus crane is wet marshy areas and well-watered tracts in India. And here the background does not occur at all with the illustration. And there is another of Sheikh Zainuddin's illustration of an Indian roller, which has been made to perch on a branch of sandalwood. And here the sandalwood branch has been made to look like a succulent climber, which has sagged under the weight of Indian roller. But in effect, sandalwood is a woody tree with stiff branches. And there's no way the branch would sag under the weight of Indian roller, and the Indian roller can't sit on a twig like this. It usually perches on much stiffer perches, and it's found in dry habitats and also vast grasslands in India. So the habitat, the component that's been projected in the illustration of Sheikh Zainuddin is not the right one. But again, when you look at T.C. Jerdon's illustrations, where he commissioned locally, took the support of local artists to create his illustrations. And here, this illustration of Shaheen Falcon, he says that the accompanying figure was taken from a living bird I had for some time in my possession at Madras, indicating that he had a collection of birds in a menagerie. And he made the local artist illustrate this bird. Whereas in effect, the bird usually is found in a habitat like this, in tall rocky hills and also cliffside habitats, which is not the true habitat, this feature that has been represented in this image, where the bird has been made to perch on a low trunk of a tree. And even Lady Elizabeth Gwillim has painted this species, where the bird has been made to perch on a boulder in a vast dry terrain, which is not the true habitat of the species. And it's not just the 18th and 19th century illustrations. Even when you go back to as early as 16th century, you find that this is an illustration of great hornbill of India, which has been found in the miniature of Shahjahan album, painted by Ustad Mansoor. And here, this hornbill has been made to sit on a mound of earth in a dry terrain, where in effect, the species usually is a denizen of wet evergreen forest and perches on tall lofty trees. And what you see in this image is not the kind of habitat where the bird occurs. And this bird looks totally stupefied in this illustration. But this was not, this pattern changes once toward the end of 19th century, when ornithologists like the Evo Hume, Stuart Baker started commissioning artists to illustrate their books. And this is how you get to see the illustration in their books. This is a illustration of Lesser Florican, which is an inhabitant of dry grasslands. And you get the habitat to be perfect, as illustrated by Hendrik Grunwald, which was part of the Game Birds of India, Burma and Ceylon, written by Stuart Baker. Here is another illustration of the tufted duck, again painted by the same artist, where the habitat is really properly depicted in this illustration. Then we have another set of paintings at McGill, done by Frederick John Shore, which he prepared as an appendix to John Latham's General History of Birds, which has been published in 10 volumes between 1821 to 1824. And here, John Shore collected these specimens and also wrote copious notes along with his illustrations. And here, the habitat depiction has been quite proper with most of the species. And here are two waterbirds, cormorant and Indian moorhen. And you have a woolly neck stork, a grey heron, and the Eurasian hoopoe, where the habitat component has been properly depicted. And this is my own illustration done in 1991, where I was very, very particular that I captured the habitat of the species. There's a slaty-breasted rail, which is leading 4 of its young ones in abandoned rice paddies in Bangalore. There's a reason for the lack of proper backgrounds that does not relate to the species habitat was probably none of these artists went to the field to study their subjects. The bird was supplied to the artists by the patterns or bird catchers or suppliers, traders who dealt with birds in those times. And these birds came from a menagerie or an aviary. Even the patterns did not know where the birds came from. This brings to another point of role of hidden hands who made all these things possible. And hidden hands are bird catchers like this. This is an illustration by Mary Simons of bird catchers in Madras, which clearly indicates how these bird catchers went out to the natural habitats, captured those birds, trapped those birds, and presented them to Lady Elizabeth Gwillim. And these hidden hands is not just the bird catchers, because it includes others also. In addition to bird catchers and trappers, there are aviary managers and menagerie managers, bird caretakers who, because these bird painting did not happen overnight. The birds were presented over several days to the artists so that they could paint them. And they had to be cared till that period of time by providing the proper food materials so that the bird can survive, and they need to be handled. And also there was a bird presenter who would hold these birds in front of the artist. Because this has been very, very true with Lady Elizabeth Gwillim, who writes in her letter that there was a bird catcher who used to be there in front, hold the bird in front of her when she painted. And of course, in some other cases, if the birds died, there are people who skin the birds. There may be others also who made these natural history illustration possible. Victoria Dickenson was awarded with the President's Award from the Society for the History of Natural History early this year, and for leading a team of historians and scholars in the Gwillim project, which dealt with women, environment, and networks of knowledge and exchange in early 19th century Madras. 2 years before, 2 other women were also awarded with the same award for their path-breaking work related to nature read in black and white, decolonial approaches to interpreting natural history collections, where essentially they talk about this role of hidden hands, and they talk about how the colonial collectors literally whitewashed the contribution of natives who made these natural history collections possible. So right now, of course, Victoria Dickenson is handling another project which addresses this very aspect of hidden hands in colonial natural histories, where indigenous people, local guides, servants, or slaves, women, including women of color, who played an unacknowledged role in documenting natural world. And this is very important that we recognize the role of these hidden hands, native people who made these paintings possible, or even natural history collections possible. So to sum up, there's a lot more to these 18th and 19th century Indian bird paintings that can meet the eye. These paintings are mere portraits of birds. The backgrounds do not match the natural hunts of the bird species painted. Many hidden hands made these bird paintings possible. And these paintings and natural history collections need a closer look, because we need to recognize the role of hidden hands who made it all happen, and they be given due credits. Okay, these are I took most of the images from these sources, and thank you very much for your patient listening.
Thank you very much.
Done. But the amount of stress that these birds have been put to must have been tremendous. That's another point of research to look at as to how much suffering these birds have undergone, because some of the illustrations clearly show that birds are totally alarmed, are in a state of shock, like the great hornbill that we saw. It looks totally stupefied. Otherwise, it's such a majestic bird to look at in the wild.
Any other questions?
Well, Subbu, maybe you could talk just a bit about the bird catchers, because I know you were going to show that slide of the bird catchers, and one of the things that Mary Simons was the sister painted was the bird catchers who brought.
Traditionally, bird catching was a way of life for certain section of people in India. And this technique of trapping birds for food have been, the knowledge has been passed from generation to generation. I worked with a set of bird trappers when we are ringing birds, because we need to capture them from the wild and also ring them and release them after recording all the details. And these catchers were really very, very thorough with respect to whatever they caught. Because in one instance, I was talking to this bird catcher where there was an albino pheasant-tailed jasana, which was in the middle of a marsh. And he told him, Ali Hussein was the name of the trapper. Ali Hussein, can you get that albino jasana so that we can ring them? He said that, let's see. 3 days later, we finished ringing some 300 birds at Bharatpur in Rajasthan. And he said that there's one more bird, and he pulls out this bird and gives it to me. They are that thorough. They knew that these are the first-rate field naturalists who knew the ways and habits of birds and habitat relations of the birds. They knew which bird to catch where and how to catch them. And in those days, catching birds was a way of life. Of course, that was acceptable mainly because there are plenty more birds in those times than what we have today. The greatest threat to birds have been the loss of habitat across India, across the world.
Subbu and I will have a conversation,
Certainly.
which we like to do anyway. One of the things, if you look at the paintings of Elizabeth Gwillim's outside there, you'll see the colors are absolutely vibrant. They are some of the most spectacular bird paintings in the collection, and they're large. So she was painting some birds life-size.
Exactly, yeah.
And she had a huge amount of trouble getting paper and pigments in India
All of them have to be sourced from England.
yeah, so everything was coming in, and yet she managed to do this. And so I think we talked about, Subbu and I have talked about John James Audubon, and of course there is a full-scale elephant folio Audubon here at McGill, one of the few in the world. But he was so lauded for his life-size paintings of birds. But if you look at the difference, they're very stylized. Audubon's a wonderful painter, but Gwillim has really, in terms of
Audubon dramatizes subjects.
he dramatizes the subjects.
But Elizabeth Gwillim has painted them as they are.
Yeah, and so I think the sympathy she has for the birds shows through. Audubon shot his birds and then wired them into position so he could paint them in these quite dramatic sort of postures. Mind you, he was a field ornithologist. He was looking at the birds in the field, whereas Gwillim was mainly observing birds in her garden.
Then, of course, all those species that she painted came from the wild, from bird trappers,
Yeah.
and they were presented in front of her.
There's a question from the Zoom about bird catchers, actually. Maria, was the recorded, the activity of bird catchers or capturers, was that captured by naturalists at the time? And are the birds in these collections, follow-up questions, still alive in India? So two unrelated questions, but first one about bird catchers. How was their activity recorded?
Well, how do we know about them? Yeah.
Yeah, Elizabeth Gwillim writes about them. Her sister writes about them. That she talks about one old moorman who covered the head of the bird with the cloths and held them in a menagerie. And she brought them and held them in front of Lady Elizabeth Gwillim so that she could paint. And these, of course, these were bird watchers. She mentions frequently the kind of habitats that they went to. They say that these bird watchers, every morning they go out into the hills and bring them some pretty nice birds. So they were very regular bird trappers who were employed by Lady Elizabeth Gwillim so that she could paint.
And I think also we have in the collections at the Red Path, but you can see them in other collections as well, what are called mica paintings. So paintings on mica that were sold as souvenirs to many of the British servicemen and officers of the East India Company. And they show the bird catchers. They'll show pictures of people carrying cages full of birds for sale.
Exactly, yeah.
And they were being sold for food, for pets, for
Live bird trade
singing.
was quite active in the 18th and 19th century.
Yeah. But I think, Subbu, you were saying, though, that, you know, what's happened in India, we see vultures here on the McGill campus, and you were saying fewer
All our
vultures
vultures
in
are
India
gone
now.
because of one man-made mistake of introducing one drug for veterinary use. There's a painkiller called a diclofenac, which causes kidney failure in vultures in India. Because of that, we have lost nearly about 98% of our vultures. We had millions of them before.
So some of the birds that Elizabeth Gwillim painted, we can't see in the same numbers.
We can't see them. Some of them have become very rare and endangered as well.
Thanks, Dr. Subramanya. This comes from Catherine for a fascinating presentation. She's wondering about the apparent attitude of the painters about how they have depicted birds. Catherine, if you want to clarify that. Oh, yes, there's a second part. Click send before finishing the question. I'm wondering about the artists incorrectly depicting them, incorrect identifications, etc. Did the artists not care about incorrectly depicting them, or were there constraints in obtaining accurate
No,
information?
because this was a period when birds were being discovered. They were discovered new to science as well. And the whole idea was to document the bird that were discovered. That was the main idea. The depicting backgrounds was a secondary thing. Mainly, they wanted to illustrate because these are artists who came to India from England, and they saw an opportunity where they could illustrate the amazing things that they observed in India, because the landscape was different, weather was different, and what they observed in India was fascinated them. There was new architecture and new customs, festivals, dressing traditions, dressing habits, which they wanted to share with their friends and family members way back in England. And one way to do that, in those days, we never had photography. One way to do that was to illustrate and send those illustrations back home. And in doing so, they documented, the whole idea was to document whatever they observed. And with Gwillim, of the 121 paintings, she has depicted about 104 species. And about 78 of the 75 species were already known to science. About 28 of them was not known to science when she painted them. Because unfortunately, she did not put a date and a name to these paintings. Had she done that, she would have been an authority for these 28 bird species that she painted. And it took another 40 years before people could describe these birds after Gwillim passed away. Because some of these people who commissioned these paintings saw a commercial value in these illustrations as well.
I think this is one of the things we're looking at in the Hidden Hands project, and inspired by the painting of the bird catchers in the Gwillim project, but also by thinking about Elizabeth Gwillim and her recognition. As Subbu said, she wasn't recognized for being the first describer of these birds in European science. The other thing I think that's interesting is in looking very closely at her paintings, so Subbu and I both had the opportunity to do this, I see where she had notes on the birds with the dimensions, the length of something, or the colors, and in pencil, and these were almost erased. And many of the paintings were actually cropped so that her comments were actually cut out. And we think this might have been because the paintings were appreciated only for their kind of decorative value. And her family framed them and put them on the walls or used them, stuck them in albums. And therefore, they kind of took away the scientific information she had put on the paintings. So women's contribution to science is one of the things in Hidden Hands, as we look at it, that hasn't been recognized in the same way as people who are more part of the scientific establishment of the period, who at that period were almost exclusively male.
And also it's such a loss to Madras ornithology, because Lady Elizabeth Gwillim never went to England to make a presentation of her paintings. Had she done that to a scientific community, an ornithological body, should have been author of these 28 species. She died prematurely at the age of 47 in Madras.
She was, however, called the First Lady of Science in Madras by Curtis, who published Curtis's botanical magazine for the plant species that she also sent back. But unfortunately, we only have a dozen of her drawings of plants here at McGill, and the rest have been lost. They may, and we were talking about this yesterday, they may well have been cut up and pasted onto fire screens. A lot of what women's work, when they did botanical drawings, they were used as decorative items again, made into fans, pasted on fire screens, or done almost like papier-mâché work. So again, her work, we haven't been able to find her botanical drawings.
There's one more question.
Men also were camouflaged.
That's true, Vikram, but it's more common with
I'll
women's
pop up
work.
on screen and say thank you everyone for your patience with the technical difficulties today. We will be wrapping up very shortly, maybe time for one or two more questions, one of which came from the Zoom, which I have on my phone, and asking about being able to see these paintings in person here at McGill, the watercolors. And the answer is yes, we have them out on display in the pop-up case here, and they will be for a while. So if you want to come in, there'll be some on display, and the rest of the collection is also digitized. And Labiba can put the link in the chat to the Gwillim Project website, as well as the collection itself on access to memory. We have one more question for you from the Zoom. This is from Mohed. Where did these birds migrate during changing seasons? East India Company was only in control of some portions, limited states.
No.
Does that mean that the artists were limited to birds?
Not all these birds are migrants. They are residents as well.
Okay.
So it again a different thing. Yeah, different than species. Some of the species are migrants. Some of the species are resident species.
And there was one species though that she got from Malacca. You can just mention
Yeah,
that.
she painted on crested partid, which is a bird of lowland rainforest in Malaysia, Sumatra, and Borneo. And it must have come to my address through a bird trade routes, through the trading routes of East Indian Company.
Ah,
The question was, how was her watercolors preserved?
She held them in a portfolio, and the portfolio was brought to England by her husband and sister. And of course, here, Lauren will tell you how they have been preserved at McGill Nursery. They have not been restored, they have been preserved well.
They have not been restored. Luckily, because they haven't been put on display very much, the color is still quite vibrant. Because they haven't been exposed to light, they haven't faded too much. Some of them are framed because they've been in exhibitions before, but otherwise we keep them in acid-free folders so that they're protected from the light. And generally, we do allow people to come in and request to see individual paintings, but we try to say, we encourage people to look at the online scans first, and then to come in and just look at a couple of paintings if they need to see them up close, just in order to keep them out of the light as much as possible. And beyond that, we have environmental controls. As I'm sure everyone here can feel, it's quite cold in this room. So we limit the humidity and so on in order to just make sure that the paper is well preserved. That's pretty much it.
oh, did you?
Oh.
Yes, we lent to the. Yeah, we lent it to the Aga. So Elizabeth Gwillim's work has been on display both digitally in Madras, at the Dakshina Chitra Museum, at the IIT Madras University. It's been on display there. It's been on display digitally along with Mary Simon's work at the Norwich South Asia Museum in Norwich, which holds Mary Simon's collection. So her sister's watercolors were bought in the 2000s, early 2000s, by the South Asia Museum in Norwich. They came up for auction. They were bought, and so we were able to connect through the letters Elizabeth's sister's works in Norwich with Elizabeth's collection here. And that was really, so one of our partners was the South Asian Museum in Norwich, and the letters are in the British Library. So this sort of triangle of collaboration has been quite remarkable. We also have scans of all the letters and transcriptions. And our students at McGill, who we hired through our SHIRK grant, the students were able to transcribe all the letters from Elizabeth and Gwillim and Mary Simons, over 700 pages of handwriting. And you can read them. And I have to say, I think all the people on the team who read the letters, it was like reading Jane Austen. They're wonderful to read. I would read them in the evening, at night. It was like a novel. And they are wonderful for talking about women's lives in Madras at the time, but also about talking about natural history, the environment. They were very acute observers of the environment. Vikram has noted their work looking at water and the waterways. And so it really is, if you go on the website, you'll be able to read the transcriptions. It is really worth doing. Anyway, so
I will come
thank
back up and ask everyone to give an enormous round of applause for an enormous thank you for your patience with our failure on the text side today. I encourage you to look at the paintings out in the display case, and thank you all for tuning in on Zoom and for coming in person. We will post a cleaned up recording with the right visuals on the YouTube channel. Yes, yes, exactly. We'll add that. So an enormous thank you, Subbu, and I will put in one final plug for the book that will be launched. You can see some of these images are reproduced in the book itself, and you can read the essays about the various facets of the Gwillim network, and including these bird paintings. So thank you again, everyone, for coming, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I encourage you to stop by the powwow as well if you have.
Thank you.
Okay.